Welcome sports fans to GenX Classic Sports, where we bring the nostalgia of our sports-filled youth into the present day. Grab your favorite retro jersey, crack open a cold one, and let's stroll down memory lane together.
Welcome back, everyone, to GenX Classic Sports. My name is Sean Edis, and I'm your host. And today we're going to talk about a warm, probably hot and sticky, actually, July night in Atlanta, Georgia. And one player, and his name was Bob Horner, does something that almost never happens in professional baseball. Not once in a season, not once in a decade, but in a lifetime. Bob Horner hit 4 home runs in a single game, and then he lost the game, and yeah, that actually happened. And today, we're not just going to talk about that story. We're going to put it in context with every other time, or most every other time it's ever happened in Major League Baseball history. Because what Bob Horner did on July the 6th, 1986 wasn't just a rarity. It was part of a club that is super exclusive, to the point where it barely exists when you do the math on it. So this is GenX Classic Sports, and this is one of the wildest achievements baseball has ever seen. Now, when my brother and I were kids growing up, we had cable vision in our hometown, and that's how old I am. I still say cable vision. How about that? We had cable, and our neighborhood buddies watched a lot of Cubs baseball, as we've talked about on this podcast a lot. You had to finish the Cubs game before you could go outside. But my brother and I also spent a lot of time with our grandparents in the summers, and our grandfather loved the Atlanta Braves, and that's because they were on every day, it seemed like, on, of course, TBS, back then called WTBS, out of Atlanta. And Skip Carey, if you'll remember, the son of Harry Carey, was on those broadcasts. And so my grandfather was a huge Dale Murphy fan, the great outfielder from the Braves. But there was another player I always remembered on the Braves, and his name was Bob Horner. I knew he hit 4 home runs back in the 80s, but I did not know the story around it whatsoever, and I didn't have any sense of context for how it fit into baseball history. So let's talk about Bob Horner a little bit. And he wasn't he wasn't really a national media obsession or anything. He was on a team with bigger names, but he was old school, and this dude was an old school power hitter. Definitely fit into the 80s. If you've seen him, you'll know what I'm talking about with the hair, and he had a distinct look. But let's talk about who he was. Bob Horner was born August the 6th in 1957. And he played from 1978 until 1988 between Major League Baseball and Japan. And he had some interesting things in his career that I had no idea about. First of all, I did not know he was an Arizona State Sun Devil. And if you know anything about that program, you know how many baseball players it puts into the majors. And then here's something else interesting about Bob Horner that has come up recently on this podcast, actually. Bob Horner completely bypassed the minor leagues. And a few weeks ago, we talked about Dave Winfield, and he did the exact same thing. And I said it was rare and hardly ever happened. But here I am already on the second guy that I've talked about who did this. I had no idea. But Bob Horner, after being drafted from away from the Arizona State Sun Devils, he went straight to the major leagues. And this guy, this was before we thought about the steroid era of the 90s. This was in the 80s when dudes just looked different. They did not look roided up. And this guy averaged 35 home runs and 109 RBIs during that time. So the guy could hit a baseball. Something else that's really interesting about him, he is in the College Baseball Hall of Fame, and he was in the first ever class to go into it. And we've already talked about 2 different people this year on the podcast who that was the same with. And the Baseball Hall of Fame very first class had Dave Winfield and Robin Ventura also, who we've already talked about. So Bob Horner is the 3rd person who went into that first class in 2006. I didn't know that at all either. He was the first overall pick in 1978 coming out of Arizona State. I did not know he was the first overall pick. And so his rookie season, he only played 82 games. Remember, he had just gotten out of college. So joining them late in the season, joining them, almost midway through the season probably. Well, not quite, but you know what I mean. He played in 89 games, okay? But he still led the National League third baseman, all of them, with 23 home runs. He hit 23 home runs as a rookie, which 23 home runs was pretty good back then. Nobody would even blink at it now, but that was a lot of home runs in 89 games for a rookie, okay? So, yeah, the guy stepped on the field and took care of business quickly. And here's something else I didn't know. He won the National League Rookie of the Year over none other than Ozzie Smith. So that tells you what kind of year he had. Towards the end of his career, he went to Japan in 87 and spent a season. He came back in 1988. He played for the Braves, and then he left to go to Japan, and then he came back in 88 and played pretty much an injury-riddled season with the Cardinals and retired. So yeah, that's Bob Horner, and when he got to the major leagues, the expectation for him was to hit the ball hard, hit it far, and do it as often as possible, which he did. He was one of the most feared right-handed hitters in the National League pretty instantly, but it wasn't a smooth career always, and a lot of it had to do with injuries. When Bob Horner was healthy, though, dude could hit, and we'll talk about some career numbers later. But this guy could destroy a baseball. So let's look at July 6th, 1986, and put that in context with everything else, all the other times that it happened. So old Atlanta Fulton County Stadium was the setting for the Braves versus, I believe it was Montreal Expos. So here you are, July, and at this point, no playoff implications going on, and probably not even, I don't even know if it was on TBS, but probably. Just one of those midsummer baseball nights, and in the second inning, Horner comes to the plate, and forgive me, I can't remember where he batted in the order. I don't know. Man, I wish I could remember. I want to say he was either fourth or fifth. Not sure. But in the second inning, he came up and hit a solo home run, which, hey, it's Bob Horner. Nothing unusual about that. Just a power hitter doing what a power hitter does, right? In the fourth inning, the lineup rotated back around to him, and he hit another solo home run. And, anytime the media, even back then, if the media is covering a game like they always are, or there's an audience at home watching, dude comes up and hits 2 home runs in his first 2 trips to the plate that night, you kind of start paying attention because you're hoping you'll witness history. So in the 5th inning, he comes back up again, and the crowd, of course, with a little bit of anticipation at this point, I'm sure, and he blasts a 3-run home run in the 5th. So 2 solos and a 3-run in the 5th. Not a very normal night. I'm sure the list is long of 3 home run nights, but as we're going to see, it's not so much so for 4 home run nights. So after homering in the 2nd, 4th, and 5th, he comes back up later in the 9th inning, and in one swing, he hits another solo home run, and he became the 11th player in Major League Baseball history at that time to hit 4 home runs in a single game. And the club of guys who have done that is pretty limited. And here's what makes it kind of I guess interesting to Gen X. It's a little twist to the story. But the Braves lost that game. So think about that for a minute. They lost 11-8. Now, easy to see how you could get 8 runs with a guy hitting 4 home runs. But to give up 11, I didn't look up who was pitching. This isn't about that, but obviously not a good night for the defense and the pitchers. Bob Horner, 4 home runs, Atlanta Braves take the L. And that's why sometimes, baseball makes no sense at all. And yeah, it's a statistical anomaly, but not just that. It's a reminder of how baseball used to be and still is so unpredictable, because these were the days before anybody cared or thought about launch angle and analytic dashboards on, computer programs. and expected slugging percentages and all those things people throw around now. This was just pitcher versus batter, and batter swinging for all he's worth, man. So Horner didn't have just a good game that night in Atlanta, and I'm sure some high humidity. He had one of the greatest individual offensive performances in baseball history. How could you not when you have 4 home runs and it was still a loss? So that contradiction alone makes this an unforgettable performance. But we're going to hear about some more that'll make you scratch your head too. So we do remember that era, don't we? The old baseball scoreboards that looked like they did. They literally had individual light bulbs in them. And some of those stadiums I always talk about that were perfectly round and played football on them, and the turf. This was back in the middle of all that stuff still. And a lot of games, just some really weird things could happen sometimes. So let's talk about 4 home run games historically in Major League Baseball, because I had no idea. So maybe some of you don't either. So let's go through. I'm not going to do every one of them, but there's some really interesting stuff here. So that night in 1986, Bob Horner, he joined a very exclusive club. It's one of the most exclusive clubs in all of sports. I had some research that said 17, but I think it was old. I think now we're up to 21 Major League Baseball players are a member of this club, and none of them have done this twice. So some of these are old. I'm just going to tell you, I don't care. I don't know if you care at all about what happened previous to, say, 1900, but I'm going to give you a couple of details about some really, really old stuff. There was a guy named Bobby Lowe in 1894, and supposedly that was the first time this ever happened. And I guess the trivia here is it was for a team called the Boston Bean Eaters. And this was back when home runs barely existed back when home runs barely existed at all. So, Bobby Lowe really did something out of the ordinary. So, and he did that. And I think it was a win, 20-11 football score over the Cincinnati Reds. Now, there was another guy after him in 1896, and his name was Ed Delahanty from the Phillies. And that happened in July of 1896, and he hit 4 home runs. And the trivia there is that 2 of them were inside the parkers. Now, inside the park home runs, I think, happened a lot more back then for various reasons. But I'm reading a book right now about Ty Cobb. Man, I wish I could share all that with you guys, and maybe I will someday. But reading about Ty Cobb, you do see a lot of references to inside the park home runs for whatever reason. So this guy had 4 home runs, Ed Delahanty, but 2 of them were inside the park in a 9-8 loss that day for the Phillies. Okay, now somebody you definitely heard of. 1932. The great Lou Gehrig on June the 3rd for the Yankees. He had 4 home runs. Now, Lou Gehrig, to me, if you look at a picture of Lou Gehrig right now, you will see a guy that's built like a 20th and 21st century athlete who is in the kind of shape that you look at and go, wow, I didn't know dudes back then could be built like that. Lou Gehrig could play anything, and he looks like a running back is what he looks like. And I'm very impressed with everything I've ever read about Lou Gehrig. And so the Iron Horse did this in 1932. 4 home runs, 8 RBI. And, of course, that's a big moment for the Hall of Famer there. And as a bonus, the Yankees won 20-13 over, I believe, the old Philadelphia A's at that point. Now, if you're ever in need of a good bet for trivia, I'm about to give it to you. Okay, this is really, really good. Now, had Lou Gehrig not hit those 4 home runs that night, there would still have been, a very significant thing happen that night by someone else. You ready? Tony Lazzeri, a teammate of Lou Gehrig's, he hit for the cycle that night in the exact same game, but Here's the asterisk to what happened with that. You got one guy hitting 4 home runs, but this guy hit for the cycle. And the weird part about hitting for the cycle is that Tony Lazzeri hit for the cycle with a grand slam as the home run part of it. And he was the first Major League Baseball player also to hit 2 grand slams in one game. And I'm pretty dumb and didn't write down, but I don't think I think it was a completely separate issue, a completely separate game. But he hit 2 grand slams in one game, and then in this game we're talking about here, he hit a grand slam as part of hitting for the cycle. So that's great trivia. Lou Gehrig did his thing, and then Tony Lazzeri had this whole thing happening too. There's another guy in 1936. You probably don't care. Another one in 1948. You probably don't care. Both of those won those games. 1950, Gil Hodges for the Brooklyn Dodgers in a win. He hit 4. You might have heard of Rocky Calavito in 1959 on June the 10th in a win for Cleveland Indians. Willie Mays in 1961, April 30th, Willie Mays for the San Francisco Giants in a win. He had 4 home runs. Now we're getting into some names that guys my age would probably be more than familiar with. Mike Schmidt in 1976 in April, Mike Schmidt hit 4 home runs in one game. And, you know, most dudes my age, when they think of power hitters, Mike Schmidt is one of the first ones that comes to mind from back then. So that was April 17th, 1976, and that was in a win. Bob Horner's July 6th, 1986, in a loss. And then I remember this one. It was late in my college days, and I remember this one happening because I sort of kept up with the St. Louis Cardinals back then. I was still kind of enamored with the speed factor that they used to play with. This was at post that era, but I was still kind of following them. Mark Whitten for the St. Louis Cardinals, 1993, September the 7th, in a win. He had 12 RBI in that game and 4 home runs. In 2002, I remember this one too from watching SportsCenter. May the 2nd, 2002, Mike Cameron for the Seattle Mariners. You remember Mike Cameron in a win. And it was just kind of out of the blue that Mike Cameron hit these 4 home runs in one game, and it was a big deal back then. Shawn Green in 2002 from the Dodgers in May. He hit 4 home runs. Carlos Delgado in 2003 for the Blue Jays. 4 home runs and a win. Shawn Green's was in a win. A guy that a lot of you have heard of, Josh Hamilton in 2012 in May. He hit 4 home runs, had 8 RBI in that game, and that was in a win. Scooter Gennett in 2017. Sorry, I don't know how to say his last name. With the Reds, he had 4 home runs in a win. JD Martinez in 2017 for Arizona. He hit 4 home runs in a win. Kyle Schwarber from the Phillies. He just did this in August of 2025, 4 home runs. I did not catch whether that was a win or not. Just last year, Nick Kurtz from the A's in July. He hit 4 home runs in a game. Suarez for the Diamondbacks in 2025. He hit 4 home runs in one game, and I made a note that was in a loss. So we had that happen 3 times in 2025 and twice in 2017 and twice in 2002. That's really interesting. So, yeah, that's the list of guys pretty much in history. I didn't go into detail on a couple of the old timers, but basically that's about 21 guys or whatever the record or whatever the number is. It's about 21 guys who've hit 4 home runs in one game. So, I mean, just to put it in a little bit of perspective, there's 162 games per year, and there's thousands of players across history, thousands of players across baseball history. And well over 250,000 games, I believe, have been played, and that's happened 21 times. So, it's hard to hit a baseball out of the ballpark, and to do it 4 times is quite the feat. So obviously that's beyond rare. And, somewhere I saw a quote that said when someone hits a home run, it means something has to go perfectly wrong and something has to go perfectly right at the same time. I love that quote. I think that's true. So, it's a matter of pitch selection and timing and even weather, what ballpark you're in, the confidence, all that kind of stuff, and sometimes maybe a little bit of luck. So I just love that about the fact that so much goes into hitting a baseball, and it should be rare to hit 4 home runs in a game. And here we are saying how rare it really is. So that's good. So, like I said, for me, this is a little bit of a personal story because the Braves were my grandfather's favorite team, and he certainly watched hundreds of games of theirs after he retired. And he'd do his garden work in the mornings during the late spring and summer, and he'd stand behind that tiller or dig up potatoes or pull the beans, whatever he was doing, pull peas and beans, and then he'd sit there and maybe shell peas or something and watch these games. And so, yeah, I have fond memories of sitting there watching those with him. And Dale Murphy was his guy, but, man, I sure did see a lot of Bob Horner games with him. But Bob Horner, he had some injury issues. Overall, you would think that, and this, believe me, I'm certainly not insulting someone that hit this many home runs in a pro career. I just think, generally speaking, if you're my age and you hear Bob Horner, you think he might be one of those 400 or 500 home run kind of guys. He hit 218 home runs, but like I said, he had a lot of injuries at different times. So, and just a guy that when you see him, you remember him instantly. And those Brave teams were kind of fun to watch. They had some pretty big names on them at times. So, yeah, I thought it was a cool story that Bob Horner did that when he did it in '86. And it was a fond memory for me. I can't say I was watching the game. I doubt I was, but I certainly read about it in the newspaper and probably in Sports Illustrated. Probably talked about it with my grandpa too, so that's cool. So yeah, Bob Horner, National League Rookie of the Year in 1978, and was if he was on the field, he was good for, he was a good power hitter. That's what they hired him to do, and that's what he did. So all those names of those guys that I brought up that are on that list, they are certainly part of a special group of baseball players. So anyway, that's the story of the 4 home run in one single game club in Major League Baseball, and a little bit of trivia thrown in on the side. So that's it for this edition of GenX Classic Sports, and I'm your host, Sean Enos. Hey, I'm seeing numbers climb a little, and just so you know that if you look statistically, I think word of mouth has helped us as much as anything. So tell people of a certain age that might appreciate this, what we're up to, and maybe they'll give us a listen. So until next week when we're back with more baseball, get out there and enjoy some sunshine, all right?
Thank you for joining us on GenX Classic Sports, where nostalgia meets the thrill of the game. Tune in next time for more insightful discussions and memorable moments, brought to you by Pine Street Productions. Until then, stay passionate about sports and keep the memories alive.